Welcome to the One Person Business Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Carly Reese.
And I'm Joe Rando.
And Joe, I'm really excited for today. We just met Sara a few weeks ago at one of our events, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. But Sara, your energy was just so contagious, so that when we started talking, we're like, yes, let's have her on the show. But for listeners, Sara Murray is an advisor, consultant, and speaker specializing in working with leaders to unlock the untapped potential in their prospecting and business development efforts. She empowers professionals to enhance their communication skills, approach prospecting with creativity, and effectively address business needs rather than simply push products, which I think a lot of salespeople are guilty of. She's the host of the popular podcast Prospecting on Purpose, where she provides a valuable platform for discussions on prospecting, sales, business strategies, and mindset each week, which is key. With her extensive knowledge and expertise, she's dedicated to helping individuals and organizations transform their prospecting approaches and achieve tangible results. She continues to make a significant impact on the success of her clients and the broader sales community as a whole. So, Sara, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Carly and Joe. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, and sales is, it is such a beast. I feel like you even say the word sales and some people are like, oh, they're like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? I feel like that's kind of how sales is. But you talk about sales, you just talk about prospecting on purpose and like having intention with your sales process. So let's start with that. Sales and specifically prospecting, can be really scary for people. I am one of those people. Mm-hmm. How would you recommend overcoming that fear?
Well, I love that we're just jumping right into the deep end of the pool with that question, because I do agree with you, Carly. I think that prospecting and sales does get a really trigger some icky feelings for a lot of people. And one of the things that I've experienced now that I'm more ingrained in the solopreneur, one-person business world is that we all need to be our own prospectors. We all need to be hunting for business to grow our businesses. And it's an area that's difficult to outsource, and it's an area that is really scary. So a big part of where I'm building my platform on prospecting is because it is something that comes very naturally to me. I would always joke that being in sales is like being paid to make friends. And I realized that I might be more of the exception than the rule on that one. So when I just kind of sat down and looked to chunk it down and break it down, there is a really easy way to build the confidence you need and to start to build those relationships. And then if you can prioritize the relationship part of prospecting, then the sales efforts become a lot more seamless. So I really focus hard on building the relationships in the output and the content and the workshops that I do. It's all about first having confidence in yourself. Then how do you take that confidence and start to build the relationships? And a really easy way that I like to think about this is oftentimes we put our prospects up on this pedestal, right? So it's either a client we want to work with or an intimidating client. Maybe we already have a client and they're difficult to work with, or we're chasing these people. We put them up on a pedestal, and it's really hard to jump on that pedestal if we're on the ground looking up. So a big part of what I focus on and teach is how do we bridge this gap? And the gap is from us on the ground to the client on the pedestal. How do we bridge that gap? And the trick is we don't take the client off the pedestal. We just put ourselves on the pedestal with them. And we do that through genuine interest, authentic relationship building, which leads to prized clients. And we could get into all of those in more detail.
Yeah, so all of this to me sounds like a confidence thing, like putting yourself on the pedestal, having self-confidence in yourself. But I think that's something that's lacking for a lot of people. So I think you have 4 pillars of a confident mindset. Is that right?
Yeah. So before we can even start to approach this pedestal, right? Like we're looking at it, but before we can even start to do the building blocks to get on it, we have to be really solid in our foundation. So that is mindset, our own personal brand, and then confidence. And I think where I see a lot of people get stuck is that they confuse the word confidence with like arrogance or ego. And I think that they're afraid to be confident in what they're offering because they're fearful it's going to come across to the other person that they're just egotistical or they're arrogant in their offer. So it's really important to understand that confidence is just feeling secure in yourself and your abilities. And it's not in an arrogant way, but it's in a realistic, secure way. So it's this quiet inner knowledge that you're capable of doing whatever that task is. And ideally, it's adding value to your client. So the first piece is to make sure you know that you're not coming from a place of arrogance if you're prospecting, right? You're coming from a place of confidence. So that's a big differentiator. So the first pillar that I like to focus on is really being clear on your values. And I feel like we hear the word values thrown around a lot, but there's not a lot of understanding on why we need to care about them or why we need to spend time understanding them. So when I think about values, if you can sit down and spend some time and figure out your top 3 to 5 values specific to work, because we're allowed to have values in different areas of our lives. So if we have a family, our values may be different for how we show up with our families as opposed to how we show up in our businesses. So for example, my 5 values in my business is professional, fun, creative, intentional, and approachable. That's what I wanted to build my business on. But once I have those values, I can understand, one, that I'm taking action that's in alignment with my values. So if something is out of alignment, it's a nice little metric for me to make sure I'm operating in alignment with those core values. And if I'm asked to do something or if a different opportunity lands on my desk, but it's out of alignment, I feel confident in knowing that I'm taking action in alignment with my values. So that's one piece just from an internal perspective. But from an external perspective, if you're approaching a client and you maybe have nothing in common with that prospect or that client, if you have shared values or if you can understand their values, it's going to make it a lot easier to have that conversation. So I do encourage people to sit and take some time and Google a values list. There's hundreds of values, but find the 5 that really stick out to you and write them on a Post-it note and hang them on your wall, because that's the first pillar to start to build that confidence so that you can approach the client. Any questions on pillar 1?
No, I feel like we should have the Rocky music playing in the background or something as you're talking about
We're
this.
building. Yeah, we're getting up to that.
You talk about values and, we talk a lot about goals, right? And I'm just curious if you see kind of values and goals kind of overlapping. Is it just 2 different names for the same thing? Obviously with goals, you're going to have things like revenue goals, but just in terms of your base goals for why you're becoming a solopreneur, because it shouldn't be to become a billionaire, right? It's not what it's about. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about tying values and goals and how they relate to each other in terms of this pillar.
I think that's a great question. I would keep them separate, but I would look at values as your motivator to fuel your goals. So that's just more of like the inner component that we're building to help give us the reason why we're taking action towards those goals. But Joe, I do feel like that is a really nice tie-in to the second pillar, which is understanding your own personal core competencies. Because I in my background, I've heard the term core competencies used as what's the business or the organization, what's the business's differentiators from the competitors. But I like to think of it as your own. It's great for solopreneurs, but you are your own individual business unit. And so as your own individual, personal brand, personal business unit, what are your 5, same with the values, sit with it and think of 5 core competencies that make you different from the competitor or different from your colleague or neighbor, right? So what are your 5 core competencies? So mine are, I'm a strong communicator, I'm a big motivator, I'm a risk taker, I'm creative. Other words would be, a quick learner, detail-oriented, tech-savvy, accountability, flexible, decisive. Like, take time and understand what are your core competencies, because when you blend your values with your core competencies together, that's going to help with that makeup to build that confidence so that you can approach those clients, because you're saying, I'm someone who's professional and I'm creative and I know how to add value to their business. So I don't have as much fear to try to approach them because of those pillars that I'm building in my own personal confident mindset.
This is so great. And it's funny, I had a call this morning, a Zoom meeting with somebody, and it was so interesting because they were basically taking their business, they're not solopreneurs, but they were taking their business to the next level. And, so the question was, they wanted to hire a salesperson to kind of hunt, just like we're talking about here. And I said, so you're going to hire this person, but what are you going to tell them about what makes you special? oh, we're really good at what we do and our customers love us. And I'm like, that's great, but they're not going to be able to take that and go hunt with it. It's not enough. And this is exactly what you're talking about, is kind of laying this foundation out so that when you start talking, you can explain what you're doing and what you're about and what you're good at in a way that's going to resonate and make you feel like, yeah, I belong here.
Right.
Getting on that pedestal. That's really cool.
Yeah, you have the value in what you bring to the table or what you bring to the pedestal, right? You have that value. And so even if the other person doesn't know what you bring to the table, you know what you bring to the table. And so that's fuel to get on the pedestal. And it makes it a lot more confident, and your approach is going to be a lot more genuine too, because they don't know what they don't know. It's your job to go show them and sell them. But I think that is a really great piece to lead into the third pillar, which is really paying attention to the language that we use, both internally and externally. And Carly, at the top of the interview, you asked the question about, how can we eliminate some fear? And some of the ways that I like to do that is how I speak to myself. So as we're chatting about what we bring to the table, it's like, well, that person doesn't know that they're going to run into issues here, here, and here. So me reaching out to them is being of service and offering them this thing that I know they don't know, right? And some of the phrases I like to use is, of course that person would want to work with me. I'm a professional who is a creative risk taker, use the terms that we've used up until this point. But that's one piece. Like, how do you speak to yourself internally? Another reframe that I really like to use specific to sales is, instead of I'm trying to convince this person to buy something from me, I like to change it to I'm opening the door and inviting them to buy. So it's more of a pulling them in and inviting them to purchase this thing that you've built and you have so much value and confidence in, as opposed to trying to convince them to buy or push it on them.
I love that you use the word pull. I love that, because it's years ago I was working on a big project and I had to get a bunch of city councilors and things to support the project. And I started thinking about that word, and I didn't sell them. I just kind of tried to give them reasons why it was good for the city. And I used that word deliberately, pull, and it was amazing how effective it was. I got like only one no vote out of the entire council.
Oh, congrats.
And but that is like, it's a magic approach. I'm just so psyched that you're saying this. That's great.
It is, and I think it helps eliminate some of the, if we can use some of these inner languages both internally and externally. And the external dialogue is really important too, Joe. So I like that you use the word pull with that audience. It's really trying to make sure you're aligning yourself to be more of a consultative approach versus a buyer-seller approach. And if we can use words like, I want to make sure I'm aligning myself with your business needs. I want to make sure that I'm understanding specifically what problems you solve so I can better cater my comments to your needs. Like, those types of languages take practice, but once you get them in the Rolodex, in the vocabulary, it becomes a lot more natural to use them.
Not to mention that you get a lot smarter because you're listening to them. And that's such a difference in terms of knowing what people want instead of knowing what you want them to buy.
Listening is, I think, one of the most underrated core competencies. And if you can make sure that you're listening, you find a lot of untapped opportunity that you can go chase. And it's a really simple way to just ask questions and listen. And that's a big piece when we go to approach that pedestal. I will just kind of close the loop on our fourth pillar on the confidence piece. You have to take care of yourself. We have to nurture the relationships with ourselves, because confidence comes from a real connection with yourself. And obviously, I know we hear this all the time. Self-care is important. Eat, get great sleep, eat well, exercise. Like, we all know we're supposed to do these things. But if you're not doing these things, you're showing up with an empty cup, right? Or a half empty cup. Like, if you're running on half empty, people can tell. And you really need to be someone who has the energy to go out and do what you say you're going to do. So do what you can to prioritize self-care, because that's the most important piece, especially in one-person businesses.
It's so funny you say that, because I've had some conversations recently with other professionals. I have 2 little ones. And so we were talking about that. And we were saying it's actually selfish to not take care of yourself, because then you're not giving your all. You're not 100% in the areas you need to be. Because sometimes people are like, oh, I didn't get a workout in, or I didn't do this because I was taking care of these people. But it's like, yeah, but you're probably taking care of them at 60, 70%. You need to be it's not selfish to prioritize.
And people can tell. I think people can tell. And I've noticed too, I've been outsourcing a lot more things in my business to help get kind of those ankle biters off my plate. And one of the people that I outsourced to kept saying, oh, we're so busy, da, 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 da. She kept saying that. And I'm paying her and I'm showing up saying, hey, I know you're busy, but could you fix this? Hey, I know you're busy. And I think she realized she must have been using that type of language because she said, hey, this is my job. Like, yes, I'm busy, but you're allowed to reach out to me. And so just be mindful of how we're putting ourselves out there with our empty cups or our too busy lives, because it's coming across to the other people, potentially people that you want to buy your product or service.
Tony Robbins calls it state management, right? When you go in and you get in front of people, you have to be able to adjust your state to a proper level of energy. And if you're burnt out, it's hard to do, if you got 2 hours sleep last night or whatever, which, can really rob you of that kind of ability to bring that energy up to where you need it to be when you're actually talking to people.
And the beauty of self-employment is that we can structure things the way we need them to work for us. So if you are on a call and you don't need to be in front of your computer for it, I call them walk and talks. I love my AirPods. I'm like, let's go on a walking meeting. Like, let's just knock this out over the phone. If you have to stop, our phones are so cool. You just take notes on your Google Drive. Like, we can build a life around prioritizing self-care and setting boundaries with people. As long as you're communicating, I think most people are really well receptive to it.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. Well, so now that our confidence is up here and we're ready to rock and roll, you mentioned, earlier about the connection with prospects. And so once you're confident, you can actually go out there into the wild. What are some ways people can connect with leads so that the process becomes easier?
Sure. This is my favorite thing to talk about. So when we talk about our people up on this pedestal we're trying to get to, I have 2 real steps that lead to the third step. So the first step is to establish genuine interest. And this is where listening comes into play. This is where we can start to really, I call it like cracking the door to a relationship. And specifically in the solopreneur, self-employed world, I actually think we have a much easier time of doing this with people. And one really easy example that happened actually on the Lifestar Solopreneur Success Stories. So I joined that call. Joe invited me to join. So thank you, Joe. And joined the call and loved the content that was being presented. And I asked a question on the call. And someone used my approach back at me. It worked brilliant. He is a gentleman named Doug. Shout out to Doug. Doug sent me a note on LinkedIn and he said, hey, I'm on this same call. You asked this question I had and I didn't know I had it. I actually think we have some synergies in our business. Would you be able to connect? And I'd love to spend time learning about what your, the way that the script that I use, I apologize. I don't remember exactly what Doug used, but the script I use is, I'm meeting so many people in my networking efforts. I would love to learn more about you and your business so I can keep you in mind as I'm reaching out to other people. Because I do think in this world, there are a lot of synergies to collaborate, to refer business. It's a really easy way to just have that first connection point, and it's coming from a place of genuine interest. I want to learn about you and your business, but also adding value. Because if I know about you and your business, when I meet someone over here, I may be able to present your services as I'm having those conversations. So this genuine interest piece has to be genuine. That's one of the big pieces of it, because people's BS antennas are highly tuned. But I think it's a really easy way to make sure that you're adding value by expressing interest in who they are as an individual or what their business does.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you met on the success sessions. Well, it's so cool.
It was so funny because Doug was telling me what his business is, and it's all of the things I know I could do, but they're not my zone of genius. And I told him what I like to do, and he goes, that's not my zone of genius. So we're looking to see there may be collaboration there where it's a tag team partnership. And I've been having a lot of those types of connections and structures with people. And it's really fun because you get to meet other people that are kind of that caliber or two. They're in the same space. So I've been really enjoying it. When's the next one, Carly?
Funny you say that. So if you're listening to this episode, this is going live on July 18th. The next Success Sessions event is on August 2nd, but you can go to our website if you're listening to it after August 2nd to see when the next one is coming up.
Awesome.
Just click on events in the main menu.
Yep. I would try to say the URL, but my tongue is tied today, so that is just not going to happen. But Sara, moving right along, you have 7 crucial skills for effective selling, and I've just learned so much already on this episode. Can you share those 7?
Sure, yeah.
Okay? All right.
I'd be happy to. And I do have a podcast mini-series on this, so if you want to do a deep dive, that's a great resource. But the first crucial step for effective selling is prospecting. So you have to go hunt for business to get clients. So a big part of my platform and the show is around prospecting. And I'm going to kind of skip through that one because I know we've been talking about it a lot. The second piece that does tie into what we've been speaking to as well is understanding our client's business model. And it's really, really important that we don't assume we know what it is. And that includes your prospecting and your networking efforts. So it's really important to ask questions, and it's really important to actually listen to the answer. Because I think when we meet new people, we get into this piece where we're so worried about our own introduction that we don't necessarily listen to their name. We don't hear their name, which is a really important piece, right? We're focused on what we want to say. So I would implore you to just be really present when you're meeting new people. And when you meet someone and you're about to pitch or you're learning more about their business, definitely don't assume. And I see people have fear that if they ask about their business model, it comes across that they're not prepared. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. You could be super prepared, but if you don't ask, then you may spend your whole pitch or your whole presentation talking about something that's not relevant to them. So one easy script people can use is, hey, Carly and Joe, before we get into this interview, I'd love to learn more about the One Person Business podcast so that I can better cater my comments to your audience's needs. Right? Just ask that question because they're going to tell you. One easy example I use in my corporate career, I used to sell to architecture firms and developers and interior designers, that bucket of professional services. And if I were to go into a presentation to an architecture firm and their whole website has pictures of hotels, and I go into my whole pitch talking about my solutions for hospitality, and at the end of the meeting, I realized, or the end of the presentation, I realized that they're working on a bunch of hospitals right now. I kind of wasted everyone's time, and I didn't run my meeting the way that would have resulted in the most success. So by asking this question up front, it shows that you're interested about them, and then the rest of the dialogue can be very geared towards what's going to make them money, what's going to solve problems for their business. So that's number 2. The third crucial skill for effective selling is to use storytelling to illustrate solutions instead of pushing product. Because if we ask that question at the beginning and we have a better understanding of their business model, then we can weave in stories that are going to speak specifically to their needs, as opposed to just, here's my widget, here's all the bells and whistles that it has. I think we just get in this rut where we get so excited that we have a meeting, we go straight into talking about the product, and we miss a huge opportunity to use storytelling to really make that more memorable.
I just want to say storytelling is such an underutilized tool for selling and for marketing and for just generally engaging people. We are storytelling and story consuming animals. That's the way we're built, and it's magic. And I struggle with it to make myself do it, but it's always a good idea.
I did some research prepping for the podcast episode about it, and I learned that when the human brain receives facts and figures, like data, numbers, etc., it only lights up in 2 areas. But when we hear a story that kind of weaves in those things, our brain lights up in 7 areas. So it makes it a lot more memorable. So if we have a tool that can make the brain light up in 7 areas instead of 2, why wouldn't we use it? And one piece that I think is really important, especially if you are selling a product and you aren't talking directly to the decision maker. So in a lot of business to business environments, we're selling something that may need buy-in from other people at the company, and we may not have a seat at that table with that decision maker. If you can use storytelling to get the person, I call this a train the trainer environment. So you're speaking to someone who may have to go sell on your behalf. If you don't have the audience with the decision maker, how can you use storytelling to help that person more effectively sell your product? And one example I like to use, I used to sell a lighting technology product, and I would sell to hotels. And a lot of the hotels built around the coast had these regulations for turtle nesting or bird nesting seasons. So all of the exterior lighting on the hotel would have to turn like a really dim orange color so that when the baby sea turtles hatched, they would swim towards the ocean with the moonlight reflecting on the water, as opposed to the electrical light on all of the buildings along the coastline. And if you're selling to an engineer or you're selling to anyone and they're just peppering you with questions and you're answering those questions, their brain might get it, but it may not retain it. And then if that engineer has to go sell to the hotel owner, if he goes and approaches that hotel owner with the lumen output and what the code requirements are, all the, I don't want to say the nerdy engineer stuff, but all of those facts that the engineer might get, that hotel owner doesn't really get it because it's not necessarily speaking to his business model. But if you tell the story about the baby sea turtles making it to the ocean, then that hotel owner, of course, is going to want to be in compliant, not only by the law, but it's the right thing to do to be a member of that community. So all of these skill sets really start to build on each other.
It's so funny. My first boss, when I was in high school, I entered at a marketing agency, and my boss then is now the president and CEO of this firm. And one of the smartest women I've ever met, especially when it comes to marketing and sales. And her degree was in English. And I don't think there's any, and I mean, you always have these people that are like, oh, I majored in advertising, I majored in PR. And I'm like, this English major is at the top of her game. And I think it's through storytelling. It's so important on all aspects.
Absolutely. I've only ever sold technical product, and I am not an engineer. I feel like I could take something super techie right now and go sell it to someone by just asking questions about their business model and then finding different ways that the product can help support that. But a lot of that is through some of these softer skills that aren't as focused on when you're onboarding or you're new to sales or you find yourself in sales. So that's a really big piece, is the ability to tell stories. The fourth pillar is really important. This is the ability to overcome objections and to really use this as an opportunity to turn it into expressions of our expertise. And what I see happen a lot is people get stuck in these, I like to think of it as a volleyball game, right? So you're being served an objection. You just answer back with your objection, and you go with this back and forth piece on, question, answer, question, answer. And if you're able to proactively address that objection before they even bring it up and weave in a story as to the why you have that, that's going to just show that you know what you're talking about. It's going to eliminate the back and forth volleyball, and it's going to keep you in the driver's seat as you move forward.
So true. The objections are people telling you how to sell, right? I mean, they're telling you what they need in order to buy from you. So, and I think when you talked earlier about fear, right? That is the scariest thing, is it? It's like, they're going to say no, they're going to, reject me. And it's really disconcerting. Carly, I think you speak to this sometimes, that rejection and being so painful. Yet when you feel like, no, they're just telling me how to sell, now it's not scary anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm a big people pleaser. So rejection to me, I take it really hard sometimes. But I'm working on that. But I will also say I'm playing in a tennis match this afternoon, and I just know in the back of my head now I'm going to be like, answer, objection,
return volley. I call them return volleys.
Yeah. They're just in my brain.
Well, and one really easy tool that I recommend people do if they're fearful about rejections is start to keep a list as you get them. And it's funny because I'm 1 year into my business, and I will still have meetings, and I don't know all of the objections that are coming my way. So if you could almost look at it as a gift when you get one, it's like, ooh, I got another one to add to the list. I have another opportunity to show my expertise. I would almost implore everyone to write down all the objections you get, write down your answers, and almost just practice them. And I would also encourage you to find ways to pivot it into an area where you can speak to storytelling or business model. And I can share a quick example here. One of the products that I've sold in my career are these, it was a bioethanol fire feature. So a fire pit that was made with the fire source was fuel made from corn. So like similar to how we make vodka or whiskey in the US, like it's a bio, which means food and beverage category production. So basically picture like vodka burning in a fireplace, right? But because you had that, I would use it a lot in hotels where if they had pool decks that they needed to move the fire pits and they couldn't have a hard gas line, if they needed a fire feature inside. But because it was fire, it was a product people had never seen before, we would get stuck in this volleyball game and it'd be like, what's the fuel source? What's it made of? How hot does it get? Can I roast marshmallows? What if my dog jumps into the fire? Like it was the same objections all the time. And I would nip that in the bud immediately. And I would spin it in a way where it would speak to the client's specific needs and business model. So, Mr. Hotel Owner, this fire pit is going to be a marketable amenity feature. You could put it on your website. You can advertise that you have fire elements on your property. That's going to make people want to stay here over the competitor. Number 2, don't worry about the fuel cost because you're going to have so much food and beverage sales because people are going to hang out and order drinks around your fire pit. This fire pit's going to pay for itself in your first round of drinks. So it's a non-issue. Find ways to really get ahead of those objections and weave them into ways where you're going to speak to their business model.
Are you saying to lead with that before they even raise the objections?
If you can, yeah.
Yeah.
But
cool.
that would be a more proactive approach, but that takes a little finesse and practice. But another example, I read this in an article, so this is not my example, but I thought it was really brilliant. There's a lot of people interviewing for jobs right now in the job market, right? And one of the objections that I was reading the person had is that they were slightly older and would be reporting to people who were younger than them. And so even the objection might be in the other person's head and they don't say it out loud, but you can use this opportunity to say, you may be wondering how I would feel working for someone 20 years my junior. Well, I got to tell you, I'm really excited and lit up about it because this reason, this reason, this reason. Like find ways if you think they're even unspoken or spoken objections to make sure that you're finding the business model and the opportunities to get ahead of it.
This is really good stuff. It happened to me. Years ago, I had started with a partner, an enterprise software company, and we were the high-priced leader in the industry in the sense that our prices were higher than anybody else's. We didn't have as many customers as other people, but we'd go in and we'd talk, and we'd be bidding on something, and they'd come back and go, "Well, you're the most expensive," and we'd kind of go, "Yeah," and we realized that we would then lead with, before we even got into it, look, we are the highest priced solution in the industry. And the reason for that is because we are the only truly enterprise solution, and doing that right, it costs money. And we would basically put that objection aside. So there was no more bidding. And if it wasn't something that they wanted to do, they'd walk away and we didn't waste time. So it was really great.
I love that. I think that that's crucial. And I think that's a big part of making sure that you're able to address objections up front so you don't waste people's times. And if you ask that question about business model at the beginning of the sales cycle, you may understand really quickly that there's not a fit. And then instead of everyone spinning their wheels and at the end not getting the deal across the finish line, I love that you just address the objection up front because it's okay if things aren't a fit.
Because especially as a solopreneur, that time you spend selling, it's not generating revenue directly. So you don't want to spend it on deals you're not going to close.
Right. And I think if you can even find ways to address those objections on your website before the inquiry even comes in, that way hey, this is a premium service. Maybe if it's appropriate, you put your prices on the website so that the people coming through neither party is going to be spinning their wheels.
Do you remember that ad it was so long ago, maybe you probably were young, but there used to be this ad in like Time magazine and things, and it would be this exercise machine, and it would say like, I don't know what, it was some crazy price, like $14,995. And that was all it said. And then there was like a phone number. And this thing went on for years, and I'm like, they must have been selling them. It might not have been it might have been 1,400. This was, going back a few years. So, but it was just this crazy number for this machine. And it worked because, like I said, this thing was going for years. So anyway, I'll see if I can find a link to that ad because it was
And that
Crazy.
speaks to confidence too. It's like there must be a reason why this thing's so valuable. There must be a reason why this thing's so expensive. So I think if you have that confidence mindset too, then the pricing conversation becomes a lot easier because you know the value that you're bringing to the table and you know how to address all of their objections. So the fifth crucial skill is using proper sales assets or enablement tools. I'm not going to spend that much time there, but making sure that you're using the right pieces of collateral to really communicate that message. In my fire pit example, I actually made a brochure that was a commercial program for fire features, and I put the pricing of the fuel right on there because it was always a question. So it's like, hey, we have fuel programs, use that opportunity to build your sales assets to address objections and tell stories. And then my sixth crucial skill is to stay in the driver's seat. And I think a really great example we've already discussed is that volleyball game, right? If you let your client take you off course, you're never going to get to the finish line. So when I go into meetings, and the reason why my platform is called Prospecting on Purpose is I go into every meeting with an intention of what I want to get by the end of the meeting. And so sometimes you tell the person up front, sometimes you don't, but at least have a plan. If I'm taking this person to lunch, I would really love to see potential partnership with them. I want an introduction to this person. And then I always bring things that I can offer to them too. Again, whether they know it or not, right? I might know, hey, I see that you're looking to expand here. I know someone over here. Send me an email blurb and I'll send it over to them. Find ways to add value because you're not just withdrawing. You're not just taking, right? We have to add deposits into that bank account before we can take. But a really easy way to stay in the driver's seat is to know where you need to take this call at the end of the call, where you need that client to be to either get to the next phase in the process or to close the deal.
Yeah, what do you do? Because this is so true that you can get taken off course, like, and especially if you're dealing with like C-suite people. And I'm not sure that, everybody does, but some people, some solopreneurs are going into C-suites, even if it's not for, large companies. But those people so often can just drive the process and try to take you off course just to match their agenda. What do you do about that?
This is where you got to spend time in your overcoming objections skill set building. And then I would almost encourage everyone to make a map of the ideal sales cycle. Like, okay, step one, I got this opportunity. What sales tools am I using? What stories am I using to get to step two? Step two, same process, right? Like map it out. If you keep getting the same objections in your pitches that are getting you stuck, find a way to craft a pivot point in your objection or just get ahead of it. If you find the same C-suites asking you the same questions, how can you just weave that into your presentation and address it? Maybe not right at the beginning, but address it at one stage in that process so that you're not going to get taken off course. And some easy ways that you can kind of stop that, because obviously you don't want to be disrespectful. You want to answer the question, but you can do so in a way where it's, hey, Mr. Client, Mr. Prospect, that is an amazing question. I'm right there on the same page with you. I knew you were going to ask that. So we're going to get into it towards the end of the meeting because I have some tools that are going to make it really clear to you. Find different ways to have scripted responses. I know scripts are kind of a yucky term, but it's going to help with your confidence. And if you keep getting the same things and you keep getting stuck, you need to find ways to pivot.
So I have a question with that. My default for things when I'm uncomfortable is humor. Mm-hmm. And so if I were selling and I, like I said, I'm not the best at sales, so maybe this is not the right approach, which is why I'm asking. If I saw something going off course, I think my first go-to would be like, whoa, guys, I'm driving this ship. Like, let's get back on course. And I'd say something or try to be funny like that. Is that appropriate or should you kind of just... Should you not be like, oh, I'm driving this boat, blah, blah, blah?
I don't think you need to say it so literally, but I do think you can make jokes. So let's say, I'm going to just use Joe as an example. So let's say Carly is pitching to me and Joe, and Joe keeps interrupting her, keeps asking questions. I think then you could say, Joe over here keeps trying to throw me off my pitch game. Like, I think you could still use humor in a way where you're addressing it, but I think you could spin it in a way where it's speaking to their... just aligning yourself with them. Like, Joe, I love that you're asking questions because it means that I'm keeping your attention. I think you can find different ways to still use humor, but keep it where you guys are on the same side of the fence still. It's like, hey, stay with me because I know I'm going to get you what you're asking. I know, and that's a way to show your expertise as well.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
And read the room, right? I mean,
Yeah.
There's some people that love humor and there's some people that, have never laughed in their lives. So you definitely want to read the room at anytime you're being funny, I think.
Yeah, and usually the way to read the room is just at that beginning of the presentation by asking business model. I would always carve out some time at the beginning and the end of your meeting. So if you have an hour, give yourself 5-10 minutes at the beginning to say, hey, before we hop into this call, I want to make sure I'm understanding everyone's needs. Would you mind if we did a quick intro round? Find ways to understand who everyone is in the room. If it's a virtual meeting, write their names down on a notepad, because I like using people's names forces them to listen to you, and that gets you to stay in the driver's seat. And then really what you're driving to is to close the deal. And if you can leave time at the end to either ask questions, take whatever action item you need to do to get to the next step in the sales cycle. If you take your pitch all the way up to the minute mark, you don't have time to say, hey, who else needs to be involved in this decision? Hey, what's the next step for follow-up? Hey, let's look at our calendars right now while I have you on the phone and lock in a follow-up date. Like, you have to get to that next step by the end of that meeting to close the deal. And that's our seventh crucial skill, is the ability to close the sale. And then ideally, my dream scenario is to generate repeat business from that client, because we all know it's a lot easier to build business with clients that we have versus go out and prospect for new ones.
So how do you close a sale?
Well, great question. I'm so happy you asked. I think one of the biggest pieces for me is, with all of this confident mindset that you've built and all of the skill sets that you've proven up into this point, one of the biggest assets in closing is the relationship that you establish at the beginning. And this is why I focus so heavily on relationships, because relationships usually aren't a problem, or they don't appear to be a problem until the end of the sales cycle, where now all of a sudden you're complaining about price, or now you're nickel and diming, or now there's another person who has to be involved in the decision and you've never heard that person's name throughout this whole process. So closing the sale becomes a lot easier if you've done all of these building blocks up until the closing point. And if you have that relationship with that client, when you build the relationship, the business side of things becomes a lot more seamless. Because why wouldn't I want to work with Carly? She's added so much value to me. She understands my business model. She asks me questions and listens to my responses. Like, it almost becomes a no-brainer. Why wouldn't I work with this person? Because you've done all of that foundation laying, you've aligned yourself on the pedestal with them, and you ran them through the sales really strategically by showing you know what you're talking about. Like, the closing side becomes a lot easier if you've done all that work. But one piece I really like to think about is to detach yourself from the outcome. And I know it's kind of scary, especially in one-person businesses. I can very much speak to that. Like, if I don't close a deal, it doesn't mean anything about me as a person, doesn't mean anything about the value that I bring. It's just an opportunity for me to finesse and fine-tune my messages and make sure I'm clearly communicating my value. So look at any sale that you lose as a learning opportunity. And then the sales that we win, you can have a little bit more of a detached outcome, but make sure that you're driving the whole process and you're going to be there for them. Closing becomes quite easy.
It's a skill set, right? I mean, what you're saying here is that while there are naturally born salespeople, anybody can develop selling skills. And it's, and I can attest to that, because when we first started that enterprise software company, my partner and I were both technical, right? We were both techie types. And we were the worst salespeople ever. We didn't close a deal in 6 years, and we had a few deals because of relationships, but coming out of the box cold, we didn't close anything because we would just features. Let me show you what I can do. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. Instead of like, what is your problem? What do you need? What's the issues? What are you dealing with in your business model? Instead of asking those questions and just tailoring this thing, and it was extensive, and the people would just kind of like basically wither and die listening to this hour-long presentation feature fest. And so you're right on. I mean, it is just so, and then by adjusting that approach to what you're talking about, it works, mainly by hiring a talented salesperson.
Well, I call that product vomit, Joe. You just threw up all over them. I think you said feature fest. That's better. Maybe I need to reframe that. Or you're pitch slapping them. That's a good one too. But I agree with you. And I think it is something that it's totally learnable. That's a big part of why I left my corporate job, because I got so much joy and value out of just being my authentic self. And I would sell to C-suite. I would sell to very high profile decision makers. I was selling projects in the millions of dollars repeatedly. And I did it just by being able to build relationships and use these skills. And so that's where I'm taking the business to. That's really the platform that I'm building on, because I do see a really big hole in the market for some of these. It's a balance of hard and soft skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, Sara, I have no doubt that you will help so many people be successful. So with that, I have to ask, what is your favorite quote about success?
Well, I have two, and they're very similar, but they're all around the concept of action. So for years, my favorite quote was, "Actions bring your dreams closer." And then now that I've been in my solopreneur journey, my favorite quote right now is, "Actions bring clarity." And it's so interesting because I look back, I just hit my 1 year mark, and I look back at things that I did, and I'm not sure I should have done that marketing and networking event. I'm not sure I should have done this virtual event. But every time I take action, I can point back to these different pieces I took. And it's very clear that I got this piece of business from that action. But if I didn't take that action without knowing what was in front of me, this opportunity wouldn't have happened. So actions bring clarity. A really easy way I like to look at it is you're holding a flashlight and you can only see what's immediately in front of you. The only way for the path to appear is to keep taking steps, because then the path's going to keep appearing, but you have to take action. So that action's been driving the whole business, and it's been magical. It's been great.
Well, Sara, I have to thank you. I mean, sometimes when you hear that sales is going to be the topic of something, you kind of, like, a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, I've heard this," or "I know I have to do this." You brought so much value today that I have never heard before.
Absolutely.
In all of
Thank
my
you.
listen-ins on webinars and everything for sales, you just bring something very unique to the table. And I think our audience will agree. So where can people find you? Social, website? I think you have an event coming up. Tell us everything.
Yeah, so my email is really easy. It's saramurray.com, SARAMURRAY, saramurray.com. I do have, so a lot of my services are around more enterprise teams, but with the launch of my podcast, I had a lot of people reach out as individual B2B sellers, corporate professionals, a lot of entrepreneurs and solopreneurs. And so I'm experimenting, I'm taking action on something, but I am doing a virtual event. It's called Ace Your Sales, ACE. It's going to be a 3-day paid event on the week of July 24th. So it's going to be July 25th, 26th, 27th. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific time for only 90 minutes a day. And each day we're going to focus on the ACE method. So A stands for action. That's day one. So how are you prospecting for business? How are you getting the sale? How are you identifying your big rocks to really move your goals forward? To circle back on Joe's goals comment. Day 2 is communication. So this is where we talk about storytelling, business model, weaving the stories through the sales process. And then day 3 stands for execution. So how do we overcome objections? How do we stay in the driver's seat? And how we close deals. I'm really excited. I've never done anything like this before. I think it'll be really impactful. There's a lot of people signed up already. It's different industries, so we'll have different examples, but really easy way to just sharpen your sales skills with a pretty low time commitment. So that's July 25th through the 27th. And I'll send you the link, Carly, for the show notes, but it's connect.saramurray.com/ACE, ACE. I'd be happy to have you guys join.
And if for whatever reason you're listening to this after the event date, be sure to visit Sara's website after that, because I'm sure future events will be posted there. But this will be launching on July 18th. So if you're listening now, go sign up.
Hey, and a clarity point. SARA or SARAH?
There's no H in my name. So SARA.
Cool.
Perfect.
I just wanted to check. I've got
Thank
a
you.
sister with the H, so I knew it could go either way.
Sara with an H is a photographer, saramurray.com. So I feel like I need to reach out to her and just be like, hey, let's be buddies. So we can pass things back and forth.
My sister's a photographer too. She was on the podcast last season. Yep.
Small world. Well, Sara, happy 1-year anniversary for your
Thank
business.
you.
We were so excited to see where it goes and to stay in touch and everything. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks. It was great.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks to you both. I really appreciate what you're putting out into the world. I think that we need more and more platforms like Lifestar and the One Person Business Podcast. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks. And for listeners, I say this every time, so this should be no surprise, but be sure to subscribe to our podcast. You can find it anywhere you listen, as you are listening right now. And be sure to visit lifestarwith2rs.com, where you can find a plethora of resources for every one-person business owner. We'll see you next time.